those from the Blackstone here today have to answer, and that is, who is responsible for disaster mitigation in the Blackstone Valley? Who is responsible for it? Is that, as John said, and I think Veronica talked about it as well, is this a local responsibility? Now, I'm not talking about who should do it. Now, should it be FEMA, REMA, or MEMA? I'm saying, who is responsible in your community? Now, the situation that is occurring today, for various conditions, the possibility of disasters is increasing. There's a range of conditions around why that is the case. It is almost impossible in my research I've worked around the world to find any government that says I can be absolutely responsible for every part of the community. It's just not feasible for me. They don't have the resources to do it. They have great intention and they have great capability, but to be able to mitigate at a local level to the extent that the infrastructures exist, the societies exist, the cultures exist, is problematic. So you're going to have to answer that question about who is responsible and where do we start. And then with that, John will give some closing remarks and we'll adjourn at around noon. So I hope everyone was here for that particular, this particular program and shouldn't be somewhere else. Okay, so kicking off, what I'd like to do is just take 5 minutes for you guys to ponder. What would you like to achieve by being here today? So it's a very important question to sort of make sure that you've heard the program. In that context, what do you want to get out of it? Now, what are the key things that you want to walk away from here today inside the program that we've just outlined? So if we could just take 1 or 2 minutes just in your own sort of time of reflection just to write that down so you get very, very clear why you're here. I'll give you 2 minutes. Okay. Would anyone like just to give a comment on what they found? What would you like to achieve today? Rich Davis.
I got nothing more out of this than a shared understanding of really what went wrong, what happened in October 05. That would be a good starting place.
And what do you see yourself doing with that? Is that to find out what you can do? Is it?
I need to know how my organization fits into the overall picture, and especially locally in Kentucky, what's our role in responding to future events.
Excellent. Who else?
I'll go on my side.
We're going to bring a mic over because we're taping this.
I think now. What I would like to know, obviously I said I had a business, but how does the river, or you people, I should say, affect my ability to do business? And if now there's a future being where I am?
Good question. Who else? Yeah. Nicole.
For the National Weather Service, I believe that what we can do is provide an understanding of what exactly happened from a weather standpoint that caused a flood of the proportions from October 2005. But also we fit into the second forum goal, which is identify areas where we can provide information on data and forecasts.
Excellent, thank you. One more. Lady from MEMA. Sorry, if you could just say your names.
All those acronyms. Yes, Chris McCombs, Massachusetts Emergency Management Agency. What we are here to do today and to achieve in partnership with all of you is to make a commitment to build the infrastructure from a communications perspective to share information as threats are emerging so that you can understand that there's a forecast in the future that potentially challenges the business activity that you're engaged in, and then you could begin to take appropriate steps in preparation and in mitigation therefore. And we pledge to partner with you to do that, and that's what we're here to achieve today.
Yeah, John's got a brief announcement to make before we move on.
We've had a couple of our elected officials or representatives. We want to welcome Mayor Ewick for Cumberland. Mayor, thank you for joining us. And also Charlie Hawkins from Senator Chafee's office has joined us as well. So we did the introductions just about a minute before you folks got here. So we want to recognize the fact that you're joining us as well. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Oh, okay. One more.
One more. I've been through a couple of floods in various positions with the Weather Service, and I lived through the devastating floods in my hometown of West Warwick on the Patuxent River. And your comment, my dear, is very true. You got to know thy enemy. You have to understand how our river behaves, what its driving mechanisms are. But you have to admit reality. In '82, we had to close down businesses. They had to relocate. You got to leave all the options open. Is it worth your risk? That's a hard question. Is it worth Hope Global's risk of what you went through to go through it again? We'll tell you when the flood's coming. We can't tell you how frequent these are going to occur. We know we'll have ones of equal severity, maybe even worse. I'd hate to think we'd have another 55, but we're living in a different age now. And I look at this as someone now living in the community, that holistically, we got to leave all our options open. We have to stop by understanding what this thing is, the Blackstone River, what's driving it. What are our extremes? What should we really be planning for? Should we be planning for another 15.5-foot flood? I'd argue no. We should be planning for the 55 again because that's our high-end threshold. It's kind of like dealing with a hurricane, like a big surge on Narragansett Bay. But as a community, we fail if we're not linked together. What Worcester is doing with their diversions from flow into the river is very critical to the folks in Central Falls. You may not think it, but I hope to see, as Christine said, this inner communication develop, where we all understand who is doing what where, and then at the local level, what are those risks? What does that mean to me, and how can I prepare? I would love nothing more than to you folks, a year from now, when we have another flood, know that A, I understand what my friends upriver are doing, I understand what this forecast means, and by God, 2 days in advance, I'm taking preparation so I don't have that damage. That to me is an ultimate outcome. As a homeowner, I understand my risk. Now, as a business owner that had all that flooding, that's a hard one. And I feel for you because I've seen this happen in other river basins where you come down the brass taxes. What do I do? If I know I'm going to have repetitive flooding, is elevating the first floor in my equipment an option? Is relocating the ultimate option? And these are all tools that are available to us as a community. But I think we have to start with understanding the enemy. Understand that Blackstone, it is our friend, but when nature comes calling, this is a moderate extreme event to me. But it's been many years since we've had one like this. But this is it's kind of a subtle wake-up call. But there's a lot out there we can do as a community if we just, through this venue, can talk together and work together, town by town, community by community. Forget the state borders.
Yeah.
It's a river. A river doesn't care about political boundaries. Doesn't care about state boundaries. We know that. So play that. That's an advantage to us, I think.
Thank you very much. Two things which take us to our next subject. creating a shared understanding of conditions, a context for aligned decision making. I just want to pick up on what you were saying there as I see it. One is, it's not risk in the 20th century. And I think a lot of us are still thinking we're in the 20th century. We are in the 21st century, which is a different century. Just go back 10 years ago. Now, roughly 10 years ago, there was no internet. There was none of the whole range of things that we deal with today. Go back 10 years before that, there was no fax machine. Just think about those sorts of things. Think of your life 20 years ago and go 10 years ahead, go to 2014. Now, most of the 20th century, I believe, was lived in hindsight. What we're talking about today is living a life in foresight, and particularly designing with foresight. You know, hard-nosed plans might not be the answer. Maybe it's about designing better ways of operating in sync with the emergent conditions, the things that are coming down through using foresight. You know, we can't rely on the past anymore, is what I hear in your message. The second thing is it's about a risk system, a risk mitigation system. It's not necessarily about what we're going to do here in one spot. It's about looking at a network up through the valley and a network of networks of all those things that drive a community. And I'll share those with you in a second, but I think that's a great starting point. Thanks for that comment. So the question we're going to be finally arriving on is when that first drop of water fell somewhere in October 2005, wherever it was. It might not have been just in Worcester, I don't know. It might have gone a bit north of Worcester. But what we want to know is what the whole systems of condition is. What's the whole system of conditions that we need to understand to monitor, manage and mitigate? Now, when I say we understand, is like as a system we need to understand. I don't need to know everything because I'm only one part of the system. I'm one node in the system. But I know that John knows something that he will tell me because he is able to understand that other part. So how are we going to bring this system together to understand the system of conditions? So that's our starting question. If I can just go through this idea of understanding conditions. This looks like a complex slide, but really it's not. What it's talking about is taking a responsibility for us as a community at every level that we work with. Social, economic, cultural, ecological, it doesn't matter. We need to understand the conditions. Those that are immediate, those that are happening right now, and those that are emerging. Now we're going to hear people talk about that today. John is here from Raytheon to talk about the emergent conditions when it comes down to disaster response and simulating disasters. Now what's happening, what technologies do we have today and what's happening in the future? We have Kelly going to show us a fly-through of the disaster, of the floodplain and what's possible in the future in that floodplain. We have a range of people talking about different types of immediate and emergent conditions. Now what we also want to know is not just about the immediate and emergent conditions for everything. We want to be able to understand those that are local to us. As we see in the slide, those that are in the Blackstone. But what about those in the region that impact us as well? And what about the mega ones, the universal ones? You know, what about the fact that if we have a heightened range of hurricanes hitting us in the south, which tends to be outside of our span of control to a certain extent, but what does that mean to us? Now, where is the disaster management going to come from a national or level? So those sorts of conditions that go outside, you know, and we can extend this, and really it's up to you what you feel is important. We've watched the track of bird flu take its course from Hong Kong to now hit into France. We've watched it permeate through various different forms. It is now passing itself through human beings and doing all sorts of things. Now, I don't want to, this is not my role to tell you what's important. My role is to ask the questions about what you think is important. So understanding those conditions is going to be important. Some of the ones that I would say you'd need to consider is what I call this idea of disconnection at scale. I've been working in this Rhode Island and up into Mass for over 18 months to 2 years now. And I see great benefit that you have in the scale that you have here. You know, the fact that we can get these people together quite quickly, you know, in a relatively small area is great. You can't do it in other states. But what we benefit from with that scale, we lose in fragmentation. And if you just think about how we manage our communities, All of these particular and critical entities that would be impacted by a disaster. Now, the built environment, the buildings, the economy, the culture, the social life, our knowledge, our education systems, and our ecology, all part of it. But they're all fragmented, they're all split up. We don't actually meet with them in one room to develop strategy. What we're talking about with disaster mitigation potentially is what I call this whole systems approach. It's like, how do we get a whole community capability in the Blackstone that mitigates against any disaster that impacted or impacts or is impacted by any of these 6 elements? How can we work as a single unit, if you like, a single unified system to mitigate against these sorts of issues? One of the things I'd actually talk to you about is, first of all, embracing that complexity. You know, you can ignore it, if you like, and it gets back down to the risks that you're prepared to take. Are you prepared to ignore the complexity of the issue you're dealing with? Because if you are, then that's okay, as long as you're willing to take what that risk gives you if it turns against you. You know, know the enemy. I think it's a very good way to look at it. It is a complex world. The other thing that, as we're talking about up here, is that if you take these complex problems and decide not to work with them, you defer them into the future. That's all you do. They don't go away necessarily. By deferring them into the future, someone else then has to manage them. Now, the fact that someone did something wrong 10 years ago, or there's a bad decision made 10 years ago, we had to deal with it in October. So it gets back down to risk management and what you're prepared to let go in terms of complexity. It also gets back down to technology. I mean, when I first got involved in this particular project, one of the things that brought me to Rhode Island and to New England was the idea that they had so much capability here. There's so much technology. You know, Raytheon's technology, there's a whole bunch of different technologies that exist in the area of this sort of thing that just don't get used. We have the technology to take these complex issues and network them and make them more simpler for us to embrace and understand. They exist. We don't necessarily have to create new stuff. So we need to use that technology. We need to know what's there. Lastly, know the conditions and capability to match. I mean, this is just some of the conditions that we see at a mega level. Every community I work with across the world knows these. They live with them every day. They don't treat them as something that may not happen. You know, the fact that the media put them on the 25th page of the paper and the latest Patriots or Red Sox information's up the front or on the back doesn't mean to say that the climate's going to act differently. It doesn't mean to say that you're not going to have a pandemic. It doesn't mean to say any of these questions. It doesn't mean to say that the national or state governments are there for you to help you. And it's not their fault if they're not. It doesn't mean that. So we need to understand what capability we have to actually match these types of conditions that we're dealing with. And if you don't have the capability, that's just the risk you're prepared to take. The other one I'd really, really impress on you is to drive it locally. If you just look at the interdependent systems that exist on this slide, and this idea of glocal, it's a buzzword if you like, but it's what you get when you act locally and think globally. It's like when you put those two together and you say, this is my responsibility in a globally oriented world. So this is a slide, I don't know if you know where this comes from. It doesn't come from the Blackstone. It actually comes from Katrina. I think this is a good example of what can happen at a major level when you haven't got these things aligned. So, our first question, when the first drop of water fell in October 2005, what conditions created the disaster? Goes back to what Rich was talking about. What happened? Hence, given what happened, what whole systems conditions do we need to monitor, manage and mitigate? So what I'd like you to do as our presenters are now talking, and that is you, the audience, is to please make notes of the key conditions. Don't be a passive listener here. I want you to act like this matters to you. If I don't understand the conditions that these guys are talking about, then I am not fully informed. Now understand that the difference between continuity and discontinuity, generally speaking, is knowledge. Those people that know about the conditions, immediate and emergent, generally, those ones who have the best knowledge are the ones that mitigate best. Those that don't have the knowledge normally get impacted the hardest. That is without a doubt. Any change management theory will tell you that. So the more knowledge that you have personally,